Hello, everyone. Are folk back? Have folks settled in? Yeah? Excited? It's good to be here. It's good to see so many people show up in the first OpenSearchCon in India. Uh, in this talk, I'm not going to talk about how awesome OpenSearch is. I think a lot of speakers are talking about it, and they're doing a great job doing it. I'm going to talk about how you could contribute to OpenSearch and make it successful. From a quick show of hands, how many of us are contributors in OpenSearch? Quick show of hands. That's good. Contributors in any open source project. Oh, that's good. Good to see so many contributors and committers out here. So yeah, briefly about myself. I'm a contributor, or previously a contributor to Elasticsearch prior to the fork, and a contributor to Lucene as well. I've worked on building the asynchronous search repository and the features around making sure that the results are available in the background asynchronously, and it's available for retrieval at a later point in time. I'm a maintainer on the OpenSearch project. So we'll start off with what makes a software great, right? And one is design, right? Obviously. Other is good performance, maintainability, debuggability of a software, stability, of course, right? But I think the most essential ingredient of a good software or a great software is the community. Many of you must have known about Apache Lucene. It's been there for around 2 decades now, been vastly successful because of great thriving community out there, right? I'll talk about and probably leave you or start with some food of thought for what is a great or who makes a great contributor. And I want this to be a little interactive about what folks think about it. Like, are great contributors born or are they made? Anyone? Made? All right. I'll come back to this. How about, is great contribution solitary or it's collaborative? Collaborative? Great. I'll come back to the answers later. Does great contribution flourish or perish with criticism? All right, that's a good answer. And the final one, right? Is great contribution intentional or subconscious? Anyone? All right, great. I think you pretty much got the answer right. So yes, the answer is yes to both for each one of them. The great contributors are like great creative geniuses. And there are also contributors who have made it really big by learning stuff, researching stuff, doing things on their own, making their way through the project. Similarly, like, are great contributors solitary or collaborative? I think it's again both, right? Most of the time what happens is when there's a design phase that happens, there's one engineer that comes up, hey, and comes up with a vision. Hey, this is the vision that project. And others basically saying, yeah, we definitely signed up for this idea. Maybe you can collaborate better and make things more better and make the whole project successful, right? So yeah, for all of these 4 points that talk about, the answer is like both. And I think for the rest of the two, the audience pretty much caught it. I'll talk about a contribution. Like, what is a great contribution? It has to be useful, of course. Like, you have to solve an actual problem and solve it really well. What about quality? I think quality is a key ingredient here, right? If you're doing making a contribution, you need to make sure it's not just one-off. You have to make contribution thinking about how it's going to shape the overall future of the project, how your contribution is going to be vital for any other user who's kind of consuming it, even short-term and long-term alike. Similarly, like, it has to be in the right context. Like, if you're contributing to, let's say, OpenSearch project, it has to be in the context of information retrieval, obviously. I'll give you a quick glance into how the project or the repository is structured in OpenSearch. At the bottom layer that you see is Apache Lucene, obviously the core foundational building block. Then you have a bunch of libraries, commons, telemetry framework, the NETI NIO framework that helps with the transport internode communication. You have the X content serialization, deserialization as to how JSON, SMILE, CBOR formats of data should look like. It's basically around the data representation. And then around data compression as to how do you want to compress data and store it. The higher levels are basically around the engine, which is the most critical part and the most, I would say, important part of the overall. It's the heart of the project. Basically, it wraps around the engine, basically wraps around the Apache Lucene framework that we have. And any construct that is based out of this, basically a node which has got a lot of shards, every shard is basically an engine here. Then you have codecs, basically tells you how to read and write the files. You can add your own custom codecs. You can define how the storage format is going to look like. Bootstrap code is there to kind of seed the plugin framework, the different services that kind of run, the storage services, the different JVM services that are run, the monitoring services that keep on running. On top of it is the main verticals that you see, basically the indexing component, the search component, and finally the cluster coordination, the metadata component that stores all the metadata information of your indices in the cluster. And the top of it is basically the extensible modular architecture of OpenSearch that allows you to write your own custom plugins, whether you're writing an ingest plugin or you're writing a storage plugin. Similarly, if you're writing your own analyzers, you write it in a module. Then you have clients, basically as to how you connect the OpenSearch server using these clients. Now, on top of it, what we have is language-specific clients that we have, and these are in the dedicated repository. So anytime you have an API change and you want to kind of use it as a high-level Java client, you probably would find your code changes going into OpenSearch Java, similarly for Python, Rust, and so on and so forth. On the other side of things, the various plugins that we've kind of built around ML models to kind of leverage the ML functionalities that I think the previous speakers talked about. The dashboard, the OpenSearch dashboard that pretty much shows you the visualization. Sorry for the spelling error. Index management basically helps you with the life cycle of the index, and pretty much the previous speaker also covered it. So this is how the whole bundle of the software is kind of packaged. And if you're looking into any of these areas, you'll be touching across these components of the OpenSearch project. So this is a good thought that I would want to start with. And it's basically that it's OK for a contributor to start with an imbellical optimism. And it's OK to ask questions. It's OK to be foolish. And there are maintainers out there they're going to help you. They're going to shape that overall contribution, making sure that the contribution is more valuable, more meaningful. Other things is basically events like these. And then we have meetup groups. We have OpenSearch conferences like these in other parts of the world, wherein you can kind of get in touch with more individuals or contributors or maintainers, share ideas, voice your opinions, see how your idea is going to shape the overall course of OpenSearch. And maybe we can get your brains, pick your brains, and make sure that your ideas kind of make it to OpenSearch. We have community triages. So if you don't know where to start from, and you have a bunch of issues, and you don't know how to triage them, there's a good mechanism that we have in place to ensure that we go through these issues, see how do we want to prioritize this, how do you want to backlog it, and it's all done in public. So we have one for indexing triage, similarly one for search, then for storage. There are many more. I've just covered the basic three right now. There's one related to performance as well. So if you're interested, please join the community triages. You'll pick a lot of ideas here. You'll learn a lot of stuff here. There's a lot of contributors who kind of join in for this forum. I'll share briefly a few tips on how to contribute. So when you contribute, you don't think about a change as your change. You think about how this change is going to help the overall success of OpenSearch or the software itself, how it's going to help the software long term. So start with an open mind. Maybe when you started it, maybe it's in the right direction, or maybe it's not. And you'll be guided through the course to make sure that your contribution makes it really big. So start with an open mind. And don't hesitate to ask questions, as I earlier said as well. Start with a pull request. Do not polish it right up, right? To polished pull requests, if they see a lot of changes or feedbacks or comments, you'll have to go through the churn of rewriting those tests, rewiring the whole stuff, and then that will create additional churn for you, and then you'll be like, hey, there's too much work, and probably drop it, right? So do not start with a fully polished pull request. You start with a half-baked pull request, get some advice, seek some initial feedback, and then go ahead and polish it. The feedback and the criticism that we talked about, right? And definitely, like, anyone who's there out as a maintainer or even a contributor, they're more likely to be people who are gonna know the system well. They've seen through the in and out. They know how the overall roadmap is shaping. So maybe if your contribution is not gonna align with it really well, they're gonna tell you how you need to align your contribution such that it's kind of channeled, more focused, and more valuable. So recognize that good intention behind it. And you have to own your contribution. So it might be a case that you start with a contribution, and you're not getting a traction. It's quite possible. Maintainers are either busy, there's a release going on, there are like security issues going on, and then you might not find the right time. Feel free to kind of either be patient enough to wait for a contributor coming around or turning around on that, or feel free to ping the OpenSearch Slack channel where we have a maintainer-specific channel, and then you can reach out to any of the maintainers for help to expedite any of your processes, be it a pull request merge, be it a feedback on the pull request that you just raised. And last but not the least, the contributing guidelines. We have kind of pretty good set of documented guidelines that you need to follow, especially the one on the security side, to make sure that any of the vulnerabilities that you see, you are reporting at, any issues that you see or bugs or features that you'd want to contribute, see what is the standard code of conduct there, and you're following that religiously. So what can you contribute? As I said, you can report an issue, you can request a feature, you find a feature missing, please feel free to open up a GitHub issue, and someone will get to it and ask you for more details on it. If you have the right context, someone can either get started on it. And why not? Go ahead and contribute the fix and features. No one's stopping you from doing that, and we'll be more than happy to kind of entertain any of the fixes or features coming along. You can help improve the documentation to start with if you don't know where to start from. There's a bunch of issues, and I'll point you later in the slide as to what you can look at to kind of improve that documentation. There are things or automations that we require on a day-to-day basis in our build processes and our release processes, where more and more automation is kind of needed. You can help contribute that and make sure you're improving the developer experience for the project as well. So those are other key areas that you can contribute to. So if you're getting started on it, you could search for these labels that we've created and designated these labels specifically for like first-time contributors. And that could be like help wanted, good first issue, or low-hanging fruit. So maybe that's a good starting point for you. And to get you a sense of what the software is all about, you can choose your area. So with alongside that, you see a good first issue. You also see a label which says it's what area it is. So if you're looking for something to pick up in, let's say, indexing, and you need to start with a small issue, maybe good to start with the first one, which has an indexing label as well as a good first issue. You can also, as I said, you can help around with the client and documentation support. So we have contributors out there who are constantly looking into the changes in different programming languages. This is in the OpenSearch Python client, and they're going to help us with what are the relevant changes that needs to be done in the documentation with every new API being added or modified for multiple reasons. If you have a thought process, if you already are aware of the system, you're pretty much into information retrieval already, you can share in your high-level vision as to how you'd want OpenSearch to focus, any focus areas that you have, any suggestions or feedback at a high level that you have for the OpenSearch project, the strategy, the technical discourse of it. You can definitely consult the roadmap. It will tell you what are the items in line, what is it in the pipeline for us across different versions that we have released, how are you planning to release it later down the line or in the current release, what can you expect out of the releases. And if you have a good idea, feel free to, again, reach out. This roadmap is going to help you at least tell us what is our vision of things and does it align or not. If even it doesn't align, we can still talk about it. And here is what you could do about like making your first contribution. So this is from a time back in 2021. We had our contributor here, who started off with a smaller issue. This was basically around a stats change in the JVM heap. We do publish the JVM heap stats as to how much is your JVM memory pressure. I think most of you must already know. This was a stats around the GC part of it, as to is the GC actually able to reclaim any of the memory. And one of the contributors, Andre, he goes by Reta, he jumped in to say, hey, I would like to pick this up. And we're like, OK, please go ahead. And I must tell you, Andre is a maintainer right now in the OpenSearch repo. He started off with contributions like these, and he's kind of doing really great in the project. Being a project maintainer, so now I'll quickly shift gears and tell you, after contributing, what can you expect, or if you really want to be a long-term committer into the project and you want to basically try to strategize or change the overall discourse of the OpenSearch project, you want to be a maintainer at some point. Once you've contributed sufficiently and then you have the right set of ideas, or basically you embody a lot of principles that a maintainer of an OpenSearch actually does. So here are some high-level role that you could come up with, what a typical maintainer does for an OpenSearch project. And it's basically around, like, I'll go through each one of them with a small example for each. But it's mostly around shaping the technical roadmap of the project, influencing it, making sure that each and every issue that is opened or PR request that is kind of raised is kind of gone through intense study, and if there are information that is needed, a maintainer will go ahead and ask it, make sure they're writing the right set of questions, balancing the trade-offs to make sure that maybe some parts of code works with one change of yours, but other parts do not. And it's a trade-off call that you have to make at some point in time, whether or not that contribution makes sense in certain parts of the code. And I'll walk you through what that means. And basically around how do you mentor and grow others, because the only way a successful project can thrive is with more community members kind of contributing, with more number of maintainers helping the existing maintainers scale. And we've been scaling through with a many number of maintainers that have been added over the course of this year and the last. Those new maintainers are basically helping us grow the next set of maintainers for the project as well. Stewardship is a key ingredient again here. We require that when you're building software, you also are vocally self-critical or vigilant about how the health of the repository is actually doing. So if you have, like, let's say, flaky tests or build failures that are happening, you're obviously, basically, that's a hurdle in the overall developer productivity. You might want to solve that first rather than contributing a big feature. So that's very important, as in you shift gears. You basically say, hey, this feature, let's park it for now. Let's fix the basic health of the repo first, make sure that's all in a good state, and then come back to the feature. So I'll give an example from one of the deep dives that we kind of do regularly. So this is one of the issues that we had from the timer that you most commonly might have seen. This is the took time for any search request that you might have seen. So this is the took time field. So after some initial issues that we were seeing, the took time was coming out to be 0 millisecond for some requests, and some over 200 milliseconds. And we were like really confused. How can a search take 0 millisecond? Is there something wrong with the timers? We checked it thoroughly, it wasn't the case. What we eventually got to was a thread pool, which was caching the system.current time millis for up to 200 milliseconds. And we realized, why do we have to cache it? And if you go through things, these are comments from the maintainers on this issue that I've kind of extracted. So it starts with basically a deep dive. Why was it introduced in the nano time mechanism, and what is the right choice? And then we come back to, again, Andre, who kind of jumps in again and then says, hey, this is something that we should look into, and we should use nano time for this, and caching is not always a good option. It depends on what path you're actually caching. So these kind of discussions happen all the time. There are maintainers who kind of talk and put their ideas across. Some maintainers might not be aligned, others are, and they'll eventually align, right? But these are like kind of good because they're probing assumptions and illuminating pitfalls. Exercise good judgment is kind of very vital to the overall success, as I talked about. And the same example, it's a related example, not the same example, which got repeated in another issue, wherein we are seeing improper times here. And then you knew the fix that we have to change it to system.nano time. But here, and again, this comes to your good sound judgment, taking the right judgment calls. One of the maintainers, Andrew, kind of jumps in and basically looks into this, says, hey, we cannot use system.nanotime all the time. It's not dirt cheap. And we only need to make sure that the code paths that are actually in the hot path, or the critical path, they do not need to take a latency hit. They're OK using a cache time, but for the others, which are basically like the async path or the not so critical paths, they can still use the more accurate timers wherein we really need to instrument something, and it's not in the critical path, you should go ahead with using the system.nano without the cache time. So those are basically judgment calls that maintainers take. This is a very basic example, but just wanted to highlight that these are discussions that happen all the time, and you'll find these across the OpenSearch repo. Aligning towards a coherent architecture. So we basically take a step back as maintainers to kind of think, how are the eventual roadmap of OpenSearch? How should it look like? How are the different issues that are there in the repo? What are different pull requests that are coming along? How do they eventually make a coherent set of changes and shape the overall vision of OpenSearch as a project? And this happens all the time. This is from Nick. He's a long-time maintainer on the OpenSearch repo. And then he realized that the code is not modular enough, and we need to modularize it better in order to make sure that the developers are kind of able to develop more modular or extensible plugins. They're not leaking some of the internal information to the plugins which do not require that information, or that is critical to the overall core. So abstracting the relevant information and exposing only those that are actually needed is a good first step to kind of getting there. Obviously, there's a lot of work in kind of achieving this, but I would say this is a very good step in kind of getting into that path. And this comes in once you have a good sense of how the overall repository or the code structure kind of looks like, and you really understand what is it to contribute in each of those modules. You'll see something like an RFC. This is called request for change, or request for comments, sorry. And you'll see that coming across for a lot of issues wherein we request feedbacks from the community, be it a small change or bigger changes. But it basically, if it has a blast, overall wider blast radius, or we're not sure if we're able to cover the entire needs of the community, maybe you're thinking about a repository that is well-versed with, let's say, AWS and doesn't work with basically GCP, we'll basically make sure that the community basically is calling that out, and we are basically self-critical of that to make sure we are building softwares that are cloud and vendor neutral. So this interface basically talks about a metadata store such that MongoDB, NoSQL, DynamoDB, Apache Cassandra can all fit in. Today, the current repositories only support blob stores, which is the blob stores from AWS, GCP, and Azure. Influence the project roadmap. So these RFCs are, again, a great way, and you'll see maintainers doing that more often than not, talking about how they want to overall improve the data transfer or the data interaction, data formats, how do you want to improve the performance by improving the cache times, the cold start times, and so on and so forth. So these are problem spaces that different maintainers in different components kind of go ahead, create an RFC, request for comments, and ask the community if they think there's a problem with this, is there something that they need to factor in, being critical themselves. You'll see some high-level diagrams as well, a design proposal, something like this, which will talk about basically how the overall architecture is going to shape up with this change. What are the disruptions that are expected? Does it align with the project roadmap? Does it align with the expectation of the community? And are there any gaps with the design per se that needs to be addressed? So you'll see a lot of discussions happen, and all the discussions happen out in the open. All the designs that we typically have worked in the past few years, you'll see a corresponding, either a design proposal or an RFC corresponding to it. This is about the replication layer that we changed back last year to support segment-based replication. And as you can see, the full design is out there in the open. You are free to kind of look into the design, contribute, comment on it, request for changes, and the maintainer or whosoever is kind of raising that RFC or the design proposal will get back to your comments. So this is one way that as a contributor, you can always go ahead and influence things like this. And this is something that maintainers do more often than not. And this is one of the basic, one of the roles, key roles of a maintainer as well. Mentors also, the maintainers also mentor others and grow other maintainers, as I talked about. So this is DB, who started off with a client change in KNN for the Python client. And he added a comment on the user guide and like adding few samples on KNN, how to use KNN using an OpenSearch Python library. You see another one here, another contributor kind of came in, and he basically sees DB's work, and he's able to replicate that same work in another project, which is the OpenSearch Java, I believe. Yeah. So you'll see more often than not, people try to replicate to make sure that they are following how maintainers think about the changes, how maintainers are actually contributing, and try to replicate it. And they have been like vastly successful. The last but not the least is stewardship. So this is an example where one of the maintainers here tried about how do we kind of take in Lucene version changes, build over build. Can you automate that process? It was fairly manual back in time, and we wanted to make sure that the developer productivity is not impacted. So this was some of the automation that we kind of looked at to make sure that we are doing those merges at a more regular cadence, and the automated framework takes care of it. This is a core backward compatibility change. Earlier, we didn't have those stringent checks on backward compatibility. So Lucene has a fairly comprehensive test suite on how the backward compatibility of storage formats in the Lucene is kind of maintained. At OpenSearch, we didn't have that enforcement, at least in our build pipelines. With this, we now have your PR request is not going to pass till your backward compatibility tests are actually passing. So with every commit, we basically see, is your change backward compatible with the previous version or not? If they're not, you probably have to fix them, and this is going to catch it. This is very important. If not handled, this will break any upgrade process that happens and will risk stability of the software in general. The final thing is around this is the nomination. So once you're actively working in a maintainer's role or in a maintainer's show, to be honest, maintainers will acknowledge that, and they'll start to grow you as well. And once they realize that you've already been to that spot, you're already operating as a maintainer, they'll kind of nominate you. Here are a few examples for people who've been like working diligently on one of the more focus areas. They are driving the stewardship for the project. They're either contributing, in this case, to the identity feature, and they've been like extensively committing to it and are like deeply invested in the project. The other examples is Andre that I talked about previously. He worked on concurrent searching and other features, multiple bug fixes, again, stewardship, Java, basically setting up Java and making sure that we are improving the developer productivity release over release. This is Sachin. We have a maintainer here. We have a talk with him. This is the next talk that he's going to give. And he was nominated for doing the OpenSearch remote storage design. And alongside, he had got a lot of other PR commits as well. And we thought he's kind of shaping the overall technical roadmap for OpenSearch. So with that, I end my talk. Thank you all. Any questions that you have? I probably have like 1 minute left, and I could take any short questions if you have.
How we take care for the vulnerabilities, basically. So most of the time when we take from upstream, we notice like a lot of vulnerabilities comes, which we have to fix, right? Maybe it's a version upgrade for some library or something. So how we ensure like whenever we push to the open source, the vulnerability should not get introduced?
That's a good question. Is the question more about security vulnerabilities, or is it about? So for security vulnerabilities, it's a different process altogether. It basically, you have to report, there's an email DL for it. You have to go ahead and email that vulnerability report, and someone will basically acknowledge it and work on it. You cannot put it out in the open because that will risk other clusters, and it will basically empower other people who are totally unaware of this vulnerability, and they'll start exploiting it. So security has a different policy altogether. It's kind of well documented in the OpenSearch contributing security guidelines that you can follow. For other vulnerabilities or for basically stability issues, you can always reach out to us in forum or in Slack or cut a GitHub issue around it.
There has been like first issues mentioned over there,
Yeah.
and there are like a lot of issues that has been raised by people, and they have not been solved for a lot of the clients. I've seen that, but I see in the comments some like I think one of the users had put maintainers had put triages 1 2 3 4 5. What does that actually mean? How do we understand that?
Okay, those are attendees. So if you open, those are like the GitHub aliases of the people who attend the triages. So for a fact, we maintain a good audit of who is attending the triage, who is kind of commenting on it, who is influencing that decision. So every attendee is marked as that. So 1, 2, 3 that you see are actually the aliases of attendees who actually are present on the triage call. So if you're one of them, your link will show up there. Those are just numbers, but actually it points to a link.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you, everyone.